All right, we are here in the home stretch. This is our last section, our last part 6. And this entire part is labeled the body's CEO. And so we're going to be talking about the brain with a little quotation from Hippocrates about the brain. And from the brain only arise our pleasures, joys, laughters, jests, as well as our sorrows, pains, griefs, and tears, which will bring us into chapter 19, where the brain is described as the enchanted loom. And I kind of glossed over that chapter title, but let's talk about it. But almost forgot to pray, so why don't we pray right now? Father, thank you that we can gather in person and online. And for anyone who would be watching after the fact, that it is you who have knit us together within the body of your own Son. So by the power of your Holy Spirit, may what we think and consider and discuss and learn today be pleasing to you and a blessing to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. So the Enchanted Loom. Anyone want to make a comment about that, just kind of in a general sense? It was one of those titles that didn't stick with me. I mean, I think I know where he's going, but anybody want to chime in?
Extensions of the cells make me think that must be, there are so many.
Yeah. Right.
10,000 points of contact.
Yeah, so if you've ever seen someone work kind of a loom, like a classical loom, you are often, within this kind of machinery, or I mean, the ones I'm thinking of are like frames that come together, but they are they're drawing in oftentimes thread from several different spools, whether it's the same color or multiple colors, whether it's for a large piece of fabric or even a carpet. And they're able to, weave together these multiple strands coming from multiple places into a singular unit. And we can look, for instance, at any of the fabric that we might be wearing. And if you look closely enough, what appears to be solid from a distance, the closer in we get, the more that you see it's a meshwork of individual threads that come together with a high degree of precision. I mean, even what we would consider a very inexpensive piece of clothing these days is pretty amazingly precise in how close together its threads are and what the pattern looks like. It's all machine done, I'm sure, but I think that's where maybe he's edging towards, with this sense of these various threads that come from different places and different colors and whatever, but they are all brought together in this very complicated tapestry where that mesh is woven in an interconnected fashion, that through the brain itself maybe is the mechanism, is the loom bringing together in all of the various threads from the nervous system that basically fill and surround everything in the body. All right, so this is one of those rare chapters he doesn't have a little personal anecdote. We have more of a historical anecdote for this kind of first page. What is our history lesson to start off with?
There was a Greek physician named Galen, I guess, and he described the body's communication system as a flow of pneuma, or spirit, through a network of hollow tubes.
Yes. Sure. And, a lot of information, and this is one of those things, to borrow C.S. Lewis' phrase, since we were just talking about him, he will comment periodically on the concept of chronological snobbery, that because people lived a long time ago, they must be dumber than we are. Perhaps because they lack certain technologies that we take for granted, well, then that must mean that they're very childlike or stupid. When the reality is, sometimes people can be far more clever because they lack the ease of tools that we do. You know, just because you can Google the answer to something doesn't mean you have any idea what it means. And it might be, you might be able to recall it at your fingertips, but the person who actually had to do the work, you know, a millennia ago to obtain that knowledge naturally, maybe understands it far better than we ever could.
Galvani and his frogs.
So yeah, we moved from we moved from Galen and this concept of the pneuma, the spirit operating through hollow tubes, which is actually kind of a pretty interesting concept. If you think about, you know, they don't have MRIs, they don't have any sort of computer assisted imaging, to be able to basically deduce how things are working and operational. And even if there's mistakes or misunderstandings or incorrect assumptions, it's not a bad starting place to consider, you know, what is it that makes us be able to move these fingers? Why would you necessarily connect it to the brain? I mean, you know, Hippocrates is writing before the birth of Christ. So this is a long time ago with what we consider to be very, very primitive medical technology or information, but he already understands that the brain is where it's at. Now, can you kind of take some guesses as to why they could deduce that?
I'm thinking because if there was a brain injury, they could see the effect that either the whole body died or certain parts of the body no longer worked.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of an observational or a trial and error thing. There are going to be times where people get hurt, where people hit their head, or their head is struck or injured in some fashion, and you can start realizing, you know, I can punch somebody in the shoulder and it doesn't impact their ability to move their fingers, but if I punch them in the head hard enough, they can't move their fingers anymore. Well, why? Unless. And so, you know, through a lot of observation, a lot of deductive reasoning, maybe some trial and error, this information begins to compile and accrue. And a lot of it makes some intuitive sense or has some, you know, a high degree of explanatory power. Now, we move on to Galvani. And does that, can you connect that name to anything, Galvani? Galvanized. Okay. Now, anybody know what the galvanization process is? So, like galvanized metal is metal that has kind of a weather-resistant coating on it. You often have galvanized metal in places that are outside, so it doesn't rust or rust as easily. Well, galvanization is taking this bare metal and putting it in a chemical solution and adding an electrical current, which changes the properties on the outside of the metal. Okay. Is that an okay explanation, Tom?
That's good.
Okay. And so what, you know, the reason it's going to be connected to Galvani, again, is the electrical current changing the properties of the surface of the metal. So what does Galvani find?
What is what?
Galvani find.
I can't hear.
What does Galvani find?
Yeah.
Find.
Yeah, there's
Oh.
Galvani does an experiment and he discovers something.
Even without their heads, the frogs can be made to jump.
All right, so frogs with no brains you can get some sort of stimulation to them through what?
Electricity.
Electricity. Now, this is happening like kind of in the mid 18th century. So where was he getting this electricity from? He wasn't, he wasn't plugging a frog into his wall. Where do you get electricity in the mid 18th century?
Thing.
A hand crank.
Maybe eventually, but this being this being the roughly the timeline of Benjamin Franklin, we're still trying to harness electricity.
He got it from lightning.
Right. Yeah, this is he is finding the electricity within lightning to be able to stimulate movement within otherwise dead muscle tissue. And I think there's even some kind of maybe just some ambient power he's able to tap into, not just like a lightning strike maybe, but whether he's gathering a lightning rod or
iron railing of his porch.
yeah. So whether the lightning was just close enough where you were kind of getting that static charge, but he is watching and observing, and a lot of scientific discovery is just that. It's somewhat accidental, but you watch and observe, and those frogs are moving around again. And so now it's time to start experimenting with that. What can make it happen? How much does it take? What does it look like? All that sort of interesting stuff. The beheaded frogs on copper hooks. Okay, I guess that's one way to do it. And so we get another guy, a contemporary, another scientist, Alessandro Volta. And what does that make you think of? Voltage. Yeah, that's where it comes from. He was such a significant pioneer in describing electricity that we even name stuff after him. So from these somewhat simple and crude observations, we're starting to get more and more information about how the body communicates within itself and how the brain can control these far-flung parts of us. So we've moved from kind of the pneuma, the spirit, hypothesized by Galen, to electrical currents somehow. So are we wired like a vast electrical circuit? And that's how the brain is connected to everything, or is it something slightly more?
More. An electrical circuit has to be closed for the electricity to go through it, whereas our neurons have synapses, little gaps, where the power has to jump that gap to connect things.
And that is kind of a not just a fascinating discovery, but a little amazing just to think about. It would be complex enough if we were talking about looped circuitry throughout our bodies, surrounding almost every cell. But now with these gaps, that the impulses and the information is actually jumping gaps, and it has to do it perfectly and precisely. And to think that this is happening, not just continuously, as though our heart beats continuously, we have to breathe day and night or we die, but every part of our body is constantly giving and receiving this information. There are occasional estimates, especially when they're talking about developing, say, artificial intelligence. about how much computer power would be necessary to run our bodies. Like if you were to compare the brain to say a computer processor, what would be its processor speed? How much RAM would we require? What would it look like, or how many, how in judging how complicated our bodies are, and translating it into potential computations that a processor could handle per second. And it's obviously far, far, far beyond anything we have any kind of current technology about. I remember very vaguely from an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, them talking about Commander Data and his positronic neural nets, which was how he was able to think, and to think as a unique being and not just a sophisticated program. And so they described him at some point about the amount of memory he had and the speed of his calculations. And I believe they spoke in terms of petaflops. And if you remember any of your metric, with the prefix is in it's a logarithmic scale, so in bases of 10. So you have a meter, and then 10 meters, that's a decameter, and then 100 meters is a centimeter, and or no, that's a hundredth of a meter.
Hectometer?
Yeah, I think that's right, a hectometer, and then a kilometer is 1,000 meters, and so on. And you can go up and you can go down. And I don't even remember off the top of my head where a peta is, but it's a lot. It's way up there. It's way up there. My first home computer, my Atari 130XE, had 128 kilobytes of RAM. Kilobytes, 1,000 bytes. And a byte is 8 bits. And I remember when it was a big deal that there was a way to store a megabyte, right? Or a million bytes. And you can't even find a computer with less than a gigabyte of onboard randomly accessed memory, because it wouldn't run anything anymore. And those are the cheap and expensive ones. And as far as storage is concerned, now we're talking in terms of terabytes. So as amazingly far flung, so if a megabyte is 1,000 kilobytes, and a gigabyte is 1,000 megabytes, and a terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes, and we're starting to, these numbers there's a lot of zeros all of a sudden. And a terabyte, we go through more than a terabyte's worth of information as far as what our body is doing, probably moment by moment. If you think about every single cell and the amount of information that it requires to keep, or what it's sending to the brain, or the way the brain has to process that and send something back, we're nowhere near being able to recreate artificially what our brains do naturally. And that's not about being smart. That's not about the potential capacity of intelligence. That's just like keeping our body breathing and moving and digesting. So we had kind of a nice little description there of our wiring through the nervous system. and we had those synapses. And I think that's where we're kind of getting into this loom issue, that we don't just have like the wire in a circuit that branches downward to something and then comes right back, but they're just everywhere. They're everywhere. These incredibly fine threads that are woven everywhere around our body, top to bottom.
How do you think we process information? I read in the book that we receive signals and we send signals out, but how do we process a simple thing like 2 times 2?
Yeah,
How do we process it?
I don't honestly know.
Do we have in our brain that formula stored, that every time we want to know what 2 plus 2 is, we have like X plus X, and then we put the 2's in to get 4? I don't know how that works.
No, I don't think anybody does. I mean, because if you think about it, even if we have that formula memorized, the processing needed to recognize that's what we need to call up in our mind, to make the connection, to interpret it, to call it up, to bring it into play, and then to do something with it is already, kind of beyond fathoming. There's a lot of discussion. It's not in this chapter, but we might potentially get it in a future chapter. And like I keep saying, I haven't read it ahead. But about trying to understand the mechanics of the brain in application to the concept of the mind. Brain and mind are similar, but not identical. If we start considering, one is biochemical processes and one has concepts of self-awareness and identity, abstract thought, creativity, things that I don't know how you possibly reduce to zeros and ones.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire concept of self-awareness, that I am me. How does that happen in, basically a bunch of chemicals and gooey blobs? Don't know.
Well, then remember back in the chapter about muscles, where we talked about learning a musical instrument, and you had this muscle memory, and somehow that gets wired into your brain.
Yeah, right. Where you're actually able to do certain things more quickly than you can consciously process.
Yeah, without thinking.
Right, right. And there's certain activities that I'm sure we must do in that fashion, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do it fast enough. There's a fun little reaction test about I'm going to get the specifics wrong, but you basically hold a ruler in front of somebody perpendicular, and their hand is underneath it, ready to catch it, and you drop it, and you're supposed to catch it. And basically some of the fastest human reactions will barely catch a ruler, and almost everybody won't be able to do it. And it seems much easier when you're looking at it, but then when it's actually your turn to do it, you start realizing, between seeing it, realizing it, responding to it, and it actually closing, it's already gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there are certain tasks that we do, especially if we're well trained to do them, that happen even faster than that. If you've never seen like the first person perspective of this, it's worth calling up a YouTube video or something like that. So we were I took Maria last night to see her friend's softball match, and this was JV high school, And so you can kind of see the ball and the bat and everything else. But if you ever look up a video of like the first person speed, and you can pick baseball or you can pick softball, because there's some softball pitches, professional softball pitches that are ridiculously fast. But let's say in Major League Baseball, an 85-mile-an-hour fastball is a very respectable fastball. That doesn't put you in the very top of things. That's just that's a good professional fastball. A ball, and baseballs are like, yay, approaching you at 85 miles an hour, and most people can't even see it. Yet these professional baseball players can make contact. Of course, not very often, because the greatest hitters in the world only they only get on base 1 out of 3 times. But still, basically that ball is coming out faster than your brain can process. It's already past you. So somehow these guys are able, and they're not swinging blindly. They're trying to make the right kind of contact, and they're trying to put it in a certain spot, or they're making decisions about, I think this ball is going to curve or it's going to slide or whatever it is. How do they even do that? How can you train yourself? And then, up the ante to realize that you are trying to hit the surface of a sphere with the surface of a cylinder. So basically 1 point on 1 point. And it's pretty impressive. So,
Right.
like I said, if you ever get the chance, you call up a little YouTube video and you can see it, because, the pitcher will stand and all of a sudden, bam, the ball's already behind you. That's it. It's already gone. You don't really realize, maybe you watch it on TV and maybe you can even see it with your eye, but when it's actually facing you, just how fast that really is. All right, so we move to this concept of the master of delegation, the body delegating. I mean, the brain, rather, delegating. What sort of things is it delegating?
One of the first things it talks about is knee reflex.
Okay. And we've all had that one, right? That little,
Hammer to the
yeah, little hammer, or a little chop right to the bent knee. Now, I will say, and I've done that test. I did not know that was a reflex of associated with balance. Did you catch that? Like, why does the body do that? Why can you stimulate the jerk of a leg through pressure underneath the kneecap? And he explains it at some point. I think I've lost it. But it's basically it's a defense mechanism related to the sensation of falling.
yeah.
And it's actually about going backwards, because your body perceives you're going to pitch forward. And I never heard that. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah, I've lost it.
It's the bottom of page, the page that normally in
Yeah, here,
front,
right.
almost, except in the case of a reflex, abrupt tension in the tendon means the person has just absorbed a sudden stress, and the reflex strengthens the leg.
Yeah, to avoid a fall.
Right.
That was, I never seen that overt connection as to why. And it's a built-in safeguard for, to self-preservation and protection from injury. And here's more of Dr. Brand's kind of practical experience. When you have leprosy patients who have lost sensation,
Yeah.
training them to blink. And you would assume, like he did, that you are highly motivated to keep your eyesight, right? This isn't something like, well, I'll try, but if it gets too hard, I won't do it. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. But how successful was he in training people to blink? like as a overt habit.
Not very well.
No.
And he said many do not learn.
Yeah, and they have to come up with these strategies and, can you imagine? I sometimes get annoyed at all the alarms I've set for myself, like, oh, it's time to get up to take the kids to school, or this person needs their medicine, or Compline is in 10 minutes. I get annoyed at stuff like that. Can you imagine? Okay, every 30 seconds, blink your eye all day long, every 30 seconds, blink.
You do it so just without thinking.
Right.
It's, if anybody said you just blinked, I'd have to stop and think, oh, did I?
Yeah. So when you, this is a small thing, but so when you go, you're going to the doctor's office for whatever reason, and the nurse comes in just to get your vitals, okay, and they do this, right? What are they measuring?
Heartbeat.
Your pulse, Marion? What are they measuring?
Temperature, blood pressure,
Heartbeat.
Pulse, respiration.
pulse,
There it
Are
is.
you
The
oxygen.
nurse knows. They are measuring your pulse and your respiration. They don't tell you.
Right.
They don't tell you that, but they're counting the beats they can feel from your heart, but they're also watching your chest rise and fall. But they don't tell you that. Why?
Should change.
You'll change it.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, accidentally, whatever it is. But if anybody says, okay, I'm going to count your breaths, you become conscious of it, and suddenly it's sort of artificial. But if I want to actually know what your resting breathing rate is, I have to count it without telling you. Because even there's no way to be aware that you're doing it and not be affecting it. This is like you can't observe an electron without changing it. Quantum theory, same thing with breathing. And so our brain has to put that in the deep background. Number one, to make sure we're always breathing and not dying. But number two, as soon as we're conscious of it, we're affecting it somehow, more or less than we would have been otherwise. What else about delegation?
I think there's an omission.
Okay.
What we've read and looking ahead at the remaining chapters, I don't see memory or memorization addressed. Now, maybe it's undoubtedly a different part of the brain, but now that we are looking at some of the functions of the brain, I don't know. I wonder how that works.
Well, now,
How does the
one of
brain
the things that I also
memorize?
that I thought was pretty amazing, it's in this chapter, was the section where they were stimulating specific spots in the brain. And the people were having these extremely vivid memories about a past event. Like memories that I couldn't remember if I tried. The one of them was they were at a train station and they could describe the different train cars. Now that's not much, Tom, but there was that sense of finding some of these connections that we almost don't know how it's done, but we do know it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, we have the issue of storage. How do we store all this?
Yeah, here's one. When trying to locate the source of epileptic seizures, he found electrical stimulation could evoke specific memories in sharp detail. one young South African patient began laughing, reliving second by second an incident on a farm in his native land. A woman recalled every note in a symphony she'd heard long before. They're in such detail, one could see a train crossing from years before. And that's the sort of thing you wouldn't remember on purpose. That's what's so amazing to me, which basically says stuff that we don't realize is stored somewhere. And
Yeah.
now it's about being able to access it.
But I think Tom's also talking about memorization of something so that you can readily access that information.
Mhm.
Like, you know, your multiplication tables or something, you just practice, practice, practice. And then, you know, you can retrieve that very quickly and easily, as opposed to this memory, this very vivid memory that's stored that we don't even realize.
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a mystery.
Interesting if they come up with a way to figure out.
It's also very exciting to think that we're able to do this.
Yeah. Well, and it's you know, kind of an acknowledgement of how we're still just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
If something is crude, I mean, because this doctor was obviously not, well, I'm going to stimulate the part of the brain that remembers train cars. I mean, you have no way to know that. I think what he was doing was stimulating certain parts of the brain and then just sort of being surprised at what comes up. So, I mean, imagine if there was a way to continue to refine that to see how things are actually categorized. And we don't know. If chronological or by subject or, you know, something even more complicated where it looks completely random, but it's not.
But that's a treatment that psychologists use of hypnosis when they take people back. And it's always been, I guess, a little bit questionable.
Yeah.
But if you really think about it, God created us with perfection. And the computer that he's developed in our brain has everything we've ever been exposed to.
Yeah.
We just, as mankind, don't have the ability to discover it.
Sure.
But that is one treatment of discovering part of it, is taking people back through hypnosis where they awaken those parts of the brain so that they can remember them, or at least see them at that moment.
And if you've you ever read or seen anything on people with eidetic memory or savants, you know, where they have this incredibly precise recall over details that seem not just trivial, but almost impossible for us to remember on purpose. And yet, you know, it's almost like there's a connection in their brains that is there for us to make, but they've made it, we don't know how. Whether it's some kind of, you know, natural thing that's occurred or what.
Wonder whether their brain is somehow different.
Yeah, it's just different. You know, there was something that got formed slightly differently, but it sort of unlocked a doorway that we might have but no access to, or at least we don't know how to access it yet. But by the way, the whole like you know, humans only use 10% of their brain thing, that's just that's like urban legend myth sort of fluff. And that's not to say we're using our full capacities. It's just to say that is a concept. It's not a scientific concept. It's just more of a rule of thumb observation to say there's so much more in there, but we just don't know how to regularly use it to its utmost efficiency.
You know, when we store something on our computer,
Yes,
we're storing a combination of ones and zeros.
correct.
Is that the way our brain works? Do we have
We don't know that.
a one and a zero
Well, yeah, you know,
combination there?
in a sense, it doesn't get any simpler than binary. Something is off or it's on. Yet there is a limitless amount of complexity that can come from that combination. But how is that done within organic matter?
Yes.
Oh no. And that is still a great mystery. Funnily enough, the term that comes into my mind is the term that the Church of the East uses for the sacraments, which is holy mystery. It kind of feels holy to me. He even talks about that when he's mentioning he sort of had some aspirations about neurosurgery at some point, but was sort of glad he didn't do it. But rather than be very jaded about being, working in the insides of the head and the brain, that a lot of these neurosurgeons still have this sense of awe and sacredness. I mean, the concept that everything that makes someone that person is somehow contained in this goo. And we get a little bit of description of the different pieces and parts, but it almost doesn't look like pieces and parts. It's by visual inspection, there are some distinguishing things, but there also seems to be a lot of not sure how to break that or the consistency of cream cheese. Can you take cream cheese and do much with it?
No. Ooh,
Right.
But if you look at the brain in what scientists have done, like with autism, they still don't understand autism, but they do understand how to work with autistic children much better than they did 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Because of the studies, and they're able to help these children function in society more appropriately. I've often wondered about that with people who have schizophrenia. Is it?
The wiring is screwed up.
Well, is the wiring screwed up, or did God give them a special gift that we don't understand because we don't have that?
I mean, think of something a little more mundane, but still quite amazing. Think about artists who can see and create things that others can't. And they can see it in a way that you really can't describe to somebody else. But it's in the production of the art, like say a painting, where you're trying to describe something that is, unique through your perspective to someone who cannot see it in that way, but you're trying to help them along. There's whether it's a creative field like painting, and I just can't really paint, or if it's something super technical, like I'm real glad that people know how to build bridges, because I could never do it. But to be able to see and understand something on these very intricate, almost hidden levels that the average person just can't even fathom. So I know a couple of people, and I think my sister is one of them, with varying degrees of synthesia, where the senses cross in ways that for most people they don't. So she used to describe being able to see sounds. Sounds had shapes and colors. I remember talking once about listening to a recording or going to a concert or something like that, and being able to describe the shapes that she saw. Father Rob's daughter associates colors and tastes. And he'll tell you all about it, and she will too. But she, something like I want the yellow pretzels, not the brown ones. And it's not, and it's about the taste that she's describing, not the fact that the package is a color, but she could. A color is not just something visual. A color contains information of taste as well. And I can't get it in my head. I mean, that's, those are things that don't seem to compute to me,
Yeah, if you don't do it, how can you?
but it makes perfect sense to her. You could say, well, she's got some wires crossed, or if somebody can see a sound or whatever, then there's a short circuit or whatever. But that short circuit is allowing someone to see something that I can't, and that's just kind of interesting.
Why do some babies like baby food and other babies won't eat it?
Yeah. And normally their palates are very simple, very, very simple, and they have to develop it. What if they can actually perceive far, at least some of them can perceive far more. When you consider, this is real, I listened to a little bit of a TED talk many years ago by a woman who was, I think she was a neurologist, but I could be off on that, some sort of neuroscience of some sort. And she wrote a book, and she would give lectures on her experience of having a stroke.
Oh.
And I think it's called Stroke of Insight. And I believe she was in her shower. And because as a researcher and clinician, she understood what was happening, her descriptions are really amazing. Because one of the things I remember her talking about was, for a moment, she began to perceive something like the gaps between the atoms and molecules of solid surfaces. How her brain could suddenly see something that, to be perfectly honest, is always there, but we can't. Anything that you perceive as solid is actually reducible at some level to probably, electrical and magnetic forces attracting and repelling each other.
That would be super microscopic.
Super microscopic.
Super microscopic.
But yet it's
to be able to see those voids, those spaces.
That's right. But with sufficient technology, we can find out it is actually true. Stuff that we perceive as solid actually has, enormous.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
So imagine your brain being able to perceive that. And I almost can't take it in. Like now we're like, the finite human mind trying to grasp the infinity of God. You just can't square that particular circle. And yet maybe there are ways and times and moments or people or something that have those connections that occur that allow something to be perceived or understood that the rest of us just can't.
That's what research is all about.
It's easy to understand how people can devote their lives to the study of the brain. We know so much, and yet we know so little.
So little.
Right. And so the chapter kind of closes on some of the relatively recent discoveries that, the images through MRIs and being able to see, in not only in greater detail, but in a higher degree of functionality, like live functionality than we've ever been able to see before. But then just when we're about to be bombarded with all of the almost limitless complexity, we end on a, no pun intended, jarring note with a story about a jar in Princeton. And what's in this jar? A brain.
Einstein's brain.
Einstein's brain. And if we were to think of something that would just seemingly spectacular and amazing, the brain of a true recognized worldwide genius, change the way we perceive the nature of the universe. And there it is, in a jar, looking like a blob. And that juxtaposition between something that's very clearly finite. I mean, it's real finite when you can put it in a jar. But to also consider how whatever that thing in a jar was, it was connected to just these absolutely infinite possibilities. It's just sort of a, you know, I don't know, almost an indescribable sense of the miracle of creation. That such a small, simple, gooey thing could not just be what makes us us, but can also strive to comprehend the infinitude of God. What else? This is you know, we've had the chance to talk about some real interesting biological processes in the body, but when we get to the brain, I kind of feel like it's when a Bible study starts getting into the book of Revelation. I feel out of my depth very quickly, you know, because it becomes so complex
Mhm.
that you could almost take a singular trail and go down forever and feel like you barely opened the first door of an infinite hallway. And I like the chapter. There's interesting stuff in the chapter, but it almost felt like I was just hanging on.
Me too. That's all.
Make you wonder what will go on in the future. Are they going to keep finding out all these marvelous things? And
Sure they will.
I'm just blows me away.
Yeah. Well, and I have every reason to believe there will be more and continued discoveries, and they might even accelerate. But I also believe this is one of those occasions where the more you know, the more
The less you know.
kind of you're going to open a new door, and like,
Yeah.
this is neat. The door is finally open, but you're going to open it up, and there's going to be another hallway filled with infinite doors behind that one you finally open.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Well, and
That's why it's so frustrating when you call a company and you get this computer that's going to take care of your problem, and it never gets there.
Not so much. Okay, well,
Okay.
we're starting to wrap things up. We're ending on the brain and in the mind and in the self, in a sense. And so we just have what, like 3 more chapters to go? 4? 4. And so we will be. This is definitely the home stretch, but we'll be talking about those sorts of things for the next few weeks. When we get to the last week in March, so not next week, but I think it might be the week after that. I'm just going to talk to you guys about what my schedule is going to look like, because I don't know yet. That's the kids' spring break. We will have class. I'm not worried about that, but it is possible that we won't do it in person. Everyone will Zoom for that one class, so that, for instance, if we wind up going to South Florida to see Lula's dad, that we could continue class, but I could do it remotely. But we will work through this, and we'll be finishing up right over the horizon. So we good?
We're good.
All right.
Thank everybody.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.